It was a sweltering Friday morning in July when Jonathan Carter, the newly appointed police chief, stepped out of his black pickup truck in the heart of West Haven, a small industrial city nestled in the outskirts of Chicago. Dressed in a faded gray t-shirt, worn-out jeans, and a pair of dusty work boots, he looked nothing like a man who had spent over 20 years rising through the ranks of law enforcement. And that was precisely his intention. Jonathan had always believed that the best way to understand a department was to see it without the polished facades of orchestrated meetings or prearranged greetings. As a black man stepping into a leadership role in a precinct known for its history of misconduct, he knew he had to witness its true nature before making any changes. And there was no better way to do that than to blend in. The precinct's parking lot was busy with officers coming and going, some chatting near their cruisers, others finishing their morning coffee. Jonathan observed the casual banter and side glances in his direction. No one recognized him yet, which wasn't surprising. His appointment had been officially announced just days ago, and he had chosen not to publicize his arrival until the formal introduction later that afternoon. Adjusting the brim of his baseball cap, Jonathan inhaled deeply, feeling the weight of his responsibility settle onto his shoulders. He had faced adversity before, but this challenge was unlike any other. As he entered through the precinct's side door, the sound of chatter, ringing phones, and the occasional radio transmission filled the air. The tiled floors reflected the harsh fluorescent lights above, and the scent of burnt coffee lingered in the air. He moved slowly, taking in the interactions around him. Groups of officers gathered around desks, some trading stories, others reviewing paperwork. No one gave him more than a passing glance until he paused near the break room. "Hey, you!" A sharp voice sliced through the noise. Jonathan turned to see a white officer striding toward him, a cocky smirk on his face. His badge read Officer Reynolds. Behind him, a few other officers leaned against the wall, watching with amused expressions. Jonathan opened his mouth to speak, but Reynolds cut him off. "Lost? This isn't a shelter," he sneered. "Take that mess somewhere else." Jonathan stiffened, the words landing like a slap. He debated whether to reveal his identity immediately or let the moment unfold further. Before he could decide, Reynolds stepped closer, his voice growing louder as if performing for his audience. "Didn't you hear me? Get out of here. We don't need people like you hanging around." Laughter erupted from the onlookers. Jonathan clenched his jaw, his pulse pounded, but he maintained his composure. He had spent years training himself to remain calm in the face of provocation. Reynolds smirked, and before Jonathan could react, the officer spit directly into his face. Time seemed to slow. The warm saliva dripped down Jonathan's cheek. Around him, the laughter grew louder. One officer slapped a desk, doubled over in amusement, while another muttered something about putting people in their place. Jonathan's heart hammered in his chest, but he refused to give them the reaction they were expecting. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a handkerchief, wiping his face with slow, deliberate movements. His voice was calm but firm when he spoke. "Is this how you treat everyone who walks through these doors?" Reynolds chuckled. "Only the ones who don't belong here." The group burst into laughter again, but Jonathan said nothing. Instead, he turned and walked toward the main office, leaving them behind. As he neared the precinct's main office, an intercom crackled to life. "All personnel, report to the briefing room. It was time." The briefing room was filled with chatter as officers filed in, some carrying coffee mugs, others joking with one another. Jonathan entered through a side door, now holding a folder with the precinct's official seal. He stood just out of view, watching the room fill with familiar faces, some still chuckling from the earlier encounter. At the front of the room, Captain Willis, a stocky man with graying hair, called for order. "All right, settle down. We've got an important introduction today." The officers quieted, their curiosity piqued. Reynolds leaned against the wall, arms crossed, a smug expression still on his face, clearly reveling in his morning entertainment. Captain Willis continued, "As you all know, Chief Wallace retired last month. We've been waiting for his replacement, and I'm pleased to introduce our new chief, a man with an impressive track record and a clear vision for this department." Jonathan stepped forward, his footsteps slow and deliberate. The room froze. Every conversation ceased as he approached the podium, his presence commanding attention. He placed the folder on the lectern and slowly scanned the room. His calm demeanor only heightened the tension. Reynolds' smirk vanished, his face paled as recognition dawned. The other officers exchanged uneasy glances, some whispering, others staring in stunned silence. "Good morning," Jonathan said, his voice steady. "My name is Jonathan Carter. As of today, I am your new chief of police." The silence was deafening. The weight of Jonathan's words settled over the room like a thick fog. Eyes darted between him and Officer Reynolds, who had gone deathly still. The smirks were gone, the chuckles silenced. Jonathan let the silence stretch, let them sit with the reality of what had just transpired. Then, with measured control, he picked up the folder in front of him and flipped it open. "I've spent the last 20 years in law enforcement. I've served in some of the toughest precincts, cleaned up departments that others had long since given up on. But I'm here now, and things are going to change." Captain Willis cleared his throat. "Chief Carter, would you like to address the department?" Jonathan nodded and stepped forward, his gaze locking onto each officer in the room. "This precinct has a reputation. Some of you wear it with pride. Others pretend it doesn't exist. But I see it for what it is. A department that has allowed toxicity to fester unchecked." He let that sink in before continuing. "The behavior I saw this morning will not stand. If you wear this badge, you will uphold the values it represents. If you can't, I suggest you turn in your badge now." A few officers shifted uncomfortably. One or two exchanged uneasy glances. Officer Reynolds, however, stood frozen, jaw tight, his fists clenching and unclenching at his sides. Jonathan continued, "I will be reviewing every single officer's record, conducting internal investigations where necessary. If you think you can keep doing business as usual, you're mistaken. We serve this city, not ourselves. The people of West Haven deserve better." The room remained silent as Jonathan closed his folder. "Now, let's get to work." As the meeting adjourned, officers filtered out, most still stunned into silence. A few murmured amongst themselves, their hushed conversations filled with speculation and worry. Reynolds shoved past his colleagues, his face a mask of controlled fury as he stormed out of the room. Jonathan watched him go, then turned to Captain Willis. "I want personnel files on my desk by the end of the day. Every officer. I want to know exactly who I'm working with." Willis hesitated before nodding. "Understood, Chief." Jonathan left the room, making his way toward his new office. The building felt different now. The air heavier. He knew he had just lit a fuse. Now, he had to see how the department reacted to the fire. By late afternoon, the files were neatly stacked on Jonathan's desk. He spent hours going through them, taking notes, marking names. Some officers had commendable records. A few had minor infractions. But others, like Reynolds, had histories riddled with complaints, misconduct reports that had been brushed aside. A knock at the door pulled him from his thoughts. Sergeant Maria Lopez, one of the few officers who had remained neutral during the morning's debacle, stepped inside. "Chief Carter, do you have a moment?" Jonathan gestured for her to sit. "What's on your mind?" Lopez hesitated before speaking. "You made a strong impression today. Some officers respect it, others, not so much." Jonathan leaned back in his chair. "Let me guess, Reynolds?" Lopez nodded. "He's furious, feels humiliated. He's been here for years. And he's used to getting his way. He won't take this lightly." Jonathan exhaled slowly. He had dealt with men like Reynolds before, officers who mistook their badge for a shield of immunity. "Then we'll see how serious he is about his job." Lopez hesitated again before adding, "Chief, be careful. You've already made enemies, and some of them don't play fair." Jonathan met her gaze. "I didn't take this job to play fair. I took it to fix a broken system." The next morning, Jonathan arrived at the precinct early. He was reviewing another stack of reports when his door swung open without warning. Reynolds stood in the doorway, his face red with barely contained anger. "You set me up," Reynolds spat. "You walked in here looking to make an example out of someone. And you picked me." Jonathan remained calm, folding his hands together. "I didn't set anyone up, Officer Reynolds. I walked in to see the truth. You just happened to reveal yourself." Reynolds scoffed. "You think you're gonna change anything? The guys here don't respect you. You're an outsider, and no matter how high up you are, that won't change." Jonathan studied him carefully. "Respect is earned, and I will earn it from those who deserve to wear this uniform. As for you," he slid a document across the desk, "I've officially opened an internal review into your conduct. If you want to keep your badge, you'd better start acting like you deserve it." Reynolds' fists clenched. "You'll regret this." Jonathan leaned forward slightly. "No, Officer Reynolds, you will." As the days passed, the tension in the precinct remained thick. Some officers began stepping up, proving they were there to serve. Others dug their heels in, resisting change at every turn. But Jonathan had started something, and he wasn't backing down. He wasn't here to be liked. He was here to lead. And nothing, not Reynolds, not corruption, not even the weight of an entire system, was going to stop him.